All right, let's get started. All right, so the midterms have been graded and will be posted on Gradescope soon. In the labs tomorrow, you'll go over the solutions to the midterm with your TAs. The median was 75. Yeah.
Solutions going to be posted as well?
Solutions will be posted as well. Yeah, not quite up yet, but they will be before the labs tomorrow. And if you find a mistake in grading your exam, the way to tell us about it is via Gradescope as well. And you can get into Gradescope, assuming I've set it up. I forget if I set it up yet. You can get to Gradescope through Canvas. Any questions or problems about anything? Yes?
Keeping the controller is the controller allowed to know about the spreadsheet panel or no?
Okay, he's asking, is the controller allowed to know about the spreadsheet panel? What's the answer to that? No. The controller doesn't know anything about what's inside the view. In particular, I mean, it should know about the controller because, about the spreadsheet panel, because you're going to write a stub to take the place of the view, and it's not going to contain a spreadsheet panel. And so the controller wouldn't work with the stub in that case. Any other questions? Yes?
So if you wanna, so ideally you would not handle anything about the panel in the controller, or would you give it only in the spreadsheet GUI, or would you expose it to the controller?
No, you would do not expose the spreadsheet panel like any other control in the view should be private. It's private to the view. It's not the business of the controller.
Okay.
The controller interacts with the view via public properties, public methods, and public events. Other questions? Yeah.
Just to re-clarify, so like let's say we wanted to make a change to the panel, and we are in the controller, so we would have the view have like a method to a public method to control the panel.
Well, okay, so he's saying, what if the controller wants to make a change to the spreadsheet, to the panel somehow? So what change do you have in mind?
Let's say you just wanted like anything like if you just wanted like shift cells over, or let's say you wanted to add a value to one of the cell blocks.
Okay, so you want to change the value that's displayed in one of the cells. Okay, so how would the controller change what's displayed in a cell over in the view? Well, you said set cell contents, but that's a model. That's the model. So how does the controller change what's displayed in a cell in the spreadsheet? The spreadsheet panel, the thing you can see, if it doesn't have access to the spreadsheet panel. Yeah.
Is it in like the controller constructor has these like events, I guess I think is what they are, and then you hook those methods into those events, and then those methods control it?
Well, sure, there are events, and I find out that something has changed, like the contents of a cell have changed, and I need to update a bunch of things in the spreadsheet panel. Okay, I'm the controller. How do I change what's displayed in the spreadsheet panel? Yeah.
What we did is we made a public method in the view, and then interacted with that method from
That's right.
the controller.
So you'd add a public method called, change value or set value or something, and it would take as parameters the name of the cell and the new thing that's supposed to be displayed in that cell, for example. And you just do it by calling that method. And that's a method on the view, and the view, and that method in the view would change what's displayed in the spreadsheet panel. Okay? Any other questions? Okay, so I told you when I showed you the architecture I had in mind, the MVC architecture I had in mind for you to use on this assignment, I told you that you would probably forget by now, because it was almost 2 weeks ago. And the assignment wasn't due right away, and then the midterm came along, and you're thinking about other things. And now you're just about, hopefully you've already gotten back to thinking about PS7. And I've gotten a lot of questions in person, on Piazza, in class here, about what I have in mind. And what I'm going to do is go back over a bit of the file analyzer example, which is the one I did 2 weeks ago, just to hopefully spur you to ask more questions so I don't have to answer so many on Piazza. So you remember that when we looked at the file analyzer, let me kill it here first. There were five versions, File Analyzer 1 through 5, where I started with sort of a simple, straightforward implementation and gradually morphed it into the architecture that I want you to use. So what I want to do is, go through File Analyzer 5 and show you what's going on. So just to remind you how it works, I will launch it here. And what comes up is a window. And I can close the window if I want to by clicking there. I can open the file menu and close it by clicking there. I can create a new window, so I can have multiple file analyzer windows at a time. I can open a file, read it in, and it tells me how many lines, words, and characters there are. And I can enter a string like X and ask it to count how many times X occurs in that file, and it tells me 81. Meanwhile, I can be over here, operating on a different file. And then when I finally close all the windows, then it shuts down. So a lot simpler than what you're doing, but it's complicated enough. It's got enough features that I can show you the architecture that I have in mind. And the architecture that I have in mind is right in this picture right here. I'm going to do the lights a little bit more for a few minutes. Okay, so those are all the classes that we have. So I have the controller, and the controller contains a model, and the controller contains a reference to an object that implements an interface, iAnalysis view. So the controller doesn't contain a reference to a analysis window object. Now let's think about how all this corresponds to what you're doing. So you're implementing a spreadsheet, model view controller. What corresponds to this model class here with what you're doing? That's the spreadsheet class from PS6. Okay? That's your model. You're writing a controller, and the controller coordinates the action, coordinates a single spreadsheet object and a single view. Okay? What does analysis window correspond to here? It's analysis window object. What's that correspond to in what you're doing?
It's just the GUI.
That's the GUI. That's the form class. So when you create, you create a new, I don't know what you're calling it, spreadsheet GUI class or something. It'll display a window, and then you drag on the spreadsheet panel, and you drag on some text boxes and some labels, and you drag on some menus. And that collection of code that is just the visual version of the spreadsheet, that's analogous to the analysis window here. That's the view part. So analysis window or spreadsheet GUI is the view part. The model over here is just a string. The model in your case is a spreadsheet object, and then the controller deals with them both. All right. Now, what's the purpose of this iAnalysis view up here? Yeah.
Isn't that the interface that our GUI is going to implement, so that way we can interact with the GUI without, we'll know, our controller will have an understanding of what ways to interact with the GUI.
Okay. So this interface is implemented by the view. And it provides the public methods, the public events, the public properties that are accessed by the controller. So when you've got a running program, the controller will contain a reference to a view object, but it won't know it as a view object. It'll know it via this interface. It'll just know it's working on something that has the same interface as a view object. What's the purpose of that? Why not just have the controller directly have it point directly from controller to analysis window in this case, or from controller to spreadsheet GUI? Yeah.
Modularization?
Well, it makes for modularization, but to what end? Yeah.
Or for automated testing.
Right, for testing purposes, we want to be able, when we test, to get rid of the analysis window, the spreadsheet GUI part, and sub in a stub that implements the same interface that makes it possible to test the controller. Because it's hard to test the controller when what it's doing is driving a GUI. We want to be able to remove the GUI and start testing on it. So, let's look at the picture for the tester. So here is okay. There's a picture. Now I have the controller, and well, unfortunately, this picture is before I had a model. The model in this case is part of the controller. The controller contains the model. You would have a reference to the model. It is pointing, it knows it holds an iAnalysis view object, but the iAnalysis view object is this analysis view stub. Then we have unit tests. The unit tests talk to the controller and talk to the analysis view stub. What does a unit test do? How does a unit test the controller with this setup? Yeah.
Unit test will fire a command through the interface
Okay.
to get the controller to do something, but then you can check the contents in your little stub to make sure that it actually did what it was supposed to.
Okay. So this analysis view stub implements the same interface as the view did. It has some additional methods, though. It has additional methods that are there to fire events. So what happens is a unit test will go to the analysis view stub and call a method that will cause an event to be fired. So that's simulating a user interface action. Okay? When that is fired, well, the controller has hooked those events, so the controller will wake up and it'll do what it normally does. It'll check the model, it will decide what it needs to do to the view, and it'll make calls on the methods provided by iAnalysis view in this case. What that's going to do is, the effect will be we're calling methods and setting properties inside of the stub. Well, the unit tests can see what's going on inside the stub, so they can make sure that the right methods were called and that the right properties were set. So that's how the unit tests work. We have to cut out the view and substitute a stub. The controller doesn't change, the unit tests bang on both of those. So let's look at the code, and with particular attention, let's think about what it's going to look like when you do it for your spreadsheet program. So let's start with, back to File Analyzer 5, we'll go to this class right here. So this is the iAnalysis view. This is the interface that's implemented by both the view and by that testing stub. So let's see what's in it. Why are those 4 events there? So we have a file chosen event, a count event, a close event, a new event. What's the purpose of those events? Yeah.
It's like instantiating events we want to host.
Yeah, those are the events that the controller cares about. So from the controller's point of view, this is all that can happen in the GUI. There could be a request to open a new window. There could be a request to close a window. And there's multiple ways to request that it close. So we don't have to know which way it was requested. Was it by the close menu? Was it by X? We don't care. We just know that we're supposed to do something about it. We can be asked to count how many strings are in the file that's been read. So that event has a string parameter, and that's the string to count. we could be asked to, we could be told that a file has been chosen, and then the controller has to go and figure out how many lines, words, and characters there are, and display that back in the GUI. So those are the events that the view exposes to the controller. Yeah.
In the iAnalysis, like in this interface, we can have as little of the actual, as few of the actual events that are declared in the analysis window, but we can't have one that isn't in the original analysis window.
Well, so okay, so let me answer what I think you're asking. When you create your form, your spreadsheet form, you know, you are going to be making use each of those things in the form, each box, each menu, and so forth. There are events associated with them, but those events are private to the view. They're not events that the controller needs to see. The events that you want the controller to see, you need to declare yourself. They're not ones you're going to get automatically. So let's think, what events will you need in your interface? What events do you need to expose to your controller for the spreadsheet program? That's one of the first decisions you have to make. Tell me one.
Save.
Okay, save. So that means user has clicked the save button. So that would be an event. Would that event take any, send any parameters along? What would be the string?
File.
It might be the file name. Okay, and so the event says save the current state of the spreadsheet to this file. So the file name will go along with the event. Okay, someone tell me another event you might want to have in your interface.
Close event.
Okay, close event. Close the current window. Okay, let me pause at this point. How many controller objects will there be? What does a controller object control? Is there one controller for the whole program?
For how many windows?
There's one controller per window. Right? That's the way I suggest you do it. So your controller always connects together a spreadsheet model with a spreadsheet view. If you say, give me a new window, then you create a new model, and you have a new view to go with it. So you always have controller, you know, if you have 3 spreadsheet windows open, you got 3 controllers. So when you say close a window, only one of the controllers is going to get that event, because the controller isn't hooked to every GUI, it's just hooked to one of them. So it gets a close event, then it does what it has to do to close down. Okay, someone tell me another event that you need to expose from your spreadsheet. What else can happen on a spreadsheet that matters to the controller? Yeah.
Making a new file,
Making a new file.
like a new spreadsheet.
Oh, like open.
Yeah.
Okay. So open is an event. Yeah.
Updating a cell.
Okay. So over in the view, the user might type in a new formula and hit enter or whatever it takes to make it take effect. And that needs to trigger an event that tells the controller that, hey, this cell has to have a new contents, which is this string. So that event would have 2 parameters that get passed along with it. And then someone tell me, what would the controller do with that information? Yeah?
It would save it in the model. We need to keep
Okay, so it would probably call set cell contents on the model, and the model would give back the names of the cells whose value have changed. What would the controller do with that?
Update the dependencies, update the cells that are dependent on.
Well, the call to set cell contents gives you back the cells that have to be updated in the view.
Right. You can iterate through all of them.
Right, you have to iterate through them and update all those cells over in the GUI. Okay, what's another event that might happen?
Help. We need to have a help button.
Okay, but there's a help button.
Navigation.
Okay, let's think about that. Does the controller need to find out, let's say, that you move however way you have to navigate? Suppose you got a selected cell at all times. Suppose you move it one cell to the left. Okay? Well, yeah, it's tempting to say no, and I was about to say it, and I thought of something. What needs to happen when you move? What changes about the display when you select a new cell? Yeah.
You need to update the contents, and that's where I'm running into the issue because you need to access the spreadsheet panel, but at the same time you can't know about it, and you need info from the model.
All right, so what you would do is, when the GUI notices that the cell has changed, it's going to fire an event. And that event is basically asking, the problem is you've got to display the new formula up at the top of, there's an editing pane where you display a formula. And probably the view isn't up to date on all the formulas, on the contents, I should be saying. And so it fires an event that says, what would be a name for that event? New cell selected event. And it would then the controller would have to go off to the model and get the cell contents, and then it would have to have a way of communicating the new contents back to the GUI. It would just be a round trip that way. So anyway, anything that happens on the view that the controller needs to know about, there needs to be an event for the controller to hook. So one of the first things you need to think about is, what events do you need to declare? And I think I don't know how many there are, but there can't be many more than what we just said. Because, it's not, the model is fairly complicated, but the things you can actually do to the spreadsheet are fairly limited. Okay? So that's the event part of this interface. So the interface contains the events you want the controller to be able to hook. Okay? Any questions I can answer about that? Okay. I'll start here. Maybe I should make this bigger. Yes?
I have a question.
Yep.
So you said that there needs to be multiple controllers when you create a new window. Where would you handle that at specifically?
Okay, so he's asking if there's a controller per window. So what I suggest you do is, and what's done in this code, is the controller takes the constructor for the controller gets as a parameter the form object it's supposed to be controlling. And so, then the controller sets up shop managing that form. And so it's when the code that creates new windows needs to do that, needs to call the constructor of the controller. So create a new form, pass it to a new controller. Yeah.
I feel like for this assignment, it would be, or like for this kind of situation, it's really hard to make black box tests, like write your test before you actually code it. Is that kind of like the way you have to do it? Is you have to you probably want to write your tests afterward?
Yeah, it depends. It could be hard to write the black box test in advance. And even if you did, they'd be incomplete, and you discover you left some out. And in reality, you iterate a bit to get to where you want it. What are these? These are properties. What are they for? There's properties, and they all have these setters. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 setters. Why are they in the interface? Yeah.
That gives the controller access to give values back to this, your analyzer.
Okay.
Because those are the things that will be displayed on there.
Right. By the way, what's missing from this because I was so lazy? Comments. Yeah. Okay. So for example, here's a word count property. If the controller decides that a new number needs to be displayed as the word count, it sets word count. And when the view notices that its properties have been set, it'll update whatever needs to be updated in the display. So we're not, we just set a property. We decide that the title at the top of the window needs to be changed. The controller sets the title property on the view. The controller decides the substring count has to change. Sets that property. A pop-up message needs to appear. We set a property. It's up to the view to turn that into things that are visible. We're just setting properties. So that's one way you can arrange for information to be sent from the controller back into the view, by having properties that the controller can set. So what are some properties that you might want to, let me get your question first.
Why do you not have any getters on these?
Okay, he asked, why don't we have getters? Why don't I have a getter on char count?
Because it's an input.
Yeah, it's because it's just a one-way street. The view never needs to tell me the character count because the controller, is the one that's computing it. Yeah.
What about for your stub though? Wouldn't they need a getter to implement your stub and do tests?
Yes, you would need a getter for the stub, but the stub doesn't go through this interface. I mean, not the stub. The unit tests look directly at the stub, which it does provide setters. The interface just says at a minimum must be a setter.
So you can have like an interface with only like you can have an interface that has set, and the actual implementation could have set and
get. Right.
Okay. Gotcha.
Okay, so what are can you think of some properties you might want to have in your controller? Your interface?
Update cell display.
Well, the problem about update cell display is it's not a single property. There's got to be the new value to display as well as the cell name. So that's going to have to be a method. Yeah?
I like a string to hold the content of the cell.
So, yeah. So you might have a property which is current contents. What's supposed to be displayed as the current contents. And so that would be a property you could set. Yeah?
So whatever we're displaying in all of our cell values, that's going to be something that will need to be set.
Need to be able to set it, but there again, it'd probably take a method because to set a value, you've got to give two pieces of information. Cell name and the new value.
The cell name is a string.
Yeah, but I don't want to have a cell name property and a value property. I need to have something that associates values with cell names. And so that would be more in the realm of a method such as do close and open new here. So you can't make everything a property. In fact, in your case, you might not be able to make much at all a property. You might need instead more in the way of methods. So what we've talked about some of the methods you need. You need a method that the controller can use to change the value that's displayed for a cell. Is a big one. And can anyone think of others? Some of you at least have thought about this a lot more than me, so you might have some ideas. Hopefully, we've divided things up so that most of the complexity is either in the controller or hopefully it's not too complex, but some of the stuff is going to be in the view. That there's not a lot of information that needs to go back and forth between the controller and the view. That will simplify this interface. Okay, so there's the interface that the controller sees. So you'll need something like that. So if that's what that looks like, let's see what the controller looks like. So this is the controller for the file analyzer window. So as I said, here's the constructor, and it takes in an iAnalysis view as its parameter. So whenever a new window is created, that's when the constructor is called. So the code that creates a new window will create a new form, and it'll create a new controller by passing that form to the controller. And what happens in the constructor? Besides saving the view, creating a model to go with the view. Yeah?
It hooks all the events.
And you hook all the events that you care about. If you don't hook the events, you're not going to, the controller will never get anything to do. Yeah?
I didn't try this, but can you hook multiple events to a single, like, can you have multiple things happen to close event?
I mean, have two handlers for it?
Yeah.
Sure.
That's what I'm on, yeah.
Yeah. You can have 0 to any number of handlers for an event. All right, so there's our controller. Now, so you notice there are these 4 methods that we're using to hook with: handle, file chosen, and so on. So there's handle, file chosen. So a file has been chosen. So what it does is it asks the model to read the file. It gets the character count from the model and sets the char count property. It gets the word count from the model, it sets the word count property. And so on. It sets the substring count to 0, it sets the search string to empty, it sets the title at the top to the name of the file. If there's a problem doing any of this, it sets the message property, which will result in a pop-up if it's implemented right. All right, so that's an example of a handler. Now, what would your handler, let's say you have an event that tells you that the contents of a particular cell have to change. So the handler would get a parameter which is the name of the cell, and it get a parameter which is the string, which is the new contents. So what would that handler look like then? Handle new contents, let's say. What would it have to do in your case? I think we already talked about it, but it's worth saying again. Well, what needs to happen when the contents of a cell changes over in the GUI?
Do you have to?
Let me get you.
But I have to call the set cell contents in our spreadsheet.
Okay.
update it,
So you call the set cell contents method over in the spreadsheet.
And then, what you get back would be the list of cells that need to be calculated.
Get back a list of cells that need to be have new values now.
And now you're gonna have to take and iterate through those and update the value through some
Okay.
interface with.
Right. So you'd have a list of cells whose values has changed. So you take the first one, you ask the model, what's the value of this cell? It tells you. Then there's some method that's going to be in the interface we just saw that sets, the controller calls to set the cell in the view to that value. Back to the model for the next value, back to the window, going through the list of things that have changed. So if the design is right, which I think it is, then it's fairly straightforward. All these handlers are pretty straightforward. Yeah.
So on the spreadsheet GUI, you use spreadsheet panel, and you use there's a method that returns the columns and rows, so you can figure out what cell you are in currently. What if you want to use the cell name to add a cell in the spreadsheet in your controller? How would you communicate the current cell from the spreadsheet panel to the controller?
Well, he's asking how to communicate information from the view into the controller. And what's the answer? What's the only way information gets? What was that? The events. The events have parameters that are sent. So you need to, an event's going to carry information about the event, and those are the parameters that are sent to the handler, like right here. This handler gets a file name as a parameter. That's because back in the view, someone chose a file, and the view decided to fire an event that carries along the name of the file name that was chosen. Okay, so that's one handler. Here's a request to close the window. Well, basically closing a window, that doesn't involve the model. Well, does it? It doesn't in this case. Would it involve, suppose you get a request to close a spreadsheet window. Does that involve the model? It actually does. Why does it involve the model? Yeah?
So we need to check if it's changed at all since it was saved.
Right, we need to check to see if there are any unsaved changes. And what we do depends on whether they're unsaved changes or not. So that involves the model. And then it would have to interact with the view again. And so on. So, these handlers, yours will be different, but they're serving the same sort of purpose. So that's the controller. It just hooks events in the constructor and then handles them. And look at what the only instance variables are. The model and the view. We don't want the controller to have a lot of state. It doesn't need state. Its state is the model. And that's handled separately. And then it's in another sense, its state is the view. And that's it doesn't, if you think you need to keep track of more information in your controller, then you've got the wrong, you've got a bad model. All right, so far we've looked at the interface that the controller sees, and we've looked at the controller. And let's take a break and we'll look at a few more things. Need to get going. All right, let's get going again. Okay, so I can look in Canvas and see how many groups there are and how many people haven't formed groups yet. And I'm hoping that those of you that haven't formed groups yet just haven't actually have a group, have a partner, but haven't bothered to tell us about it yet, because you have to do that before you can submit it. So how many of you don't have a partner yet? Okay, turn around. Okay, the rest of you, please report your partnerships. That's the information right at the top of the assignment where you go to my little app and tell us who you are. That way I can, at some point I'm going to start spamming the people that don't have groups yet, telling them to do this. So you'll save us all some trouble if you'll just do that. Okay. Back to this. So we looked at the controller, we looked at the analysis window. Let's look at the actual view. So here's the view right here, the file analyzer view. We want to look at the code behind, and that's right there. Now, what code are you going to expect to find in the view? Besides, the code's going to be generated for you automatically that actually lays things out, displays the components and so forth. So fundamentally, what does the view have to do? How do you know what events to implement in there? How do you know what methods to implement? Well, good thing to be able to answer. That's a good question to be able to answer. So, is there anything that governs? Are there any events you have to put in this thing? There are. Are there any methods you have to put in this thing? Are there any properties you have to put in this thing? What is it that forces you to put them in? Yeah?
Is this where we have to implement everything from the interface?
Right. Right. And that iAnalysis view extends the form class. So that's the base class. But it also implements this interface here. And so it had better have all that stuff. So if you start with the view, if you're designing your solution, you should think about the view and you should figure out what events do I need, what properties do I need, what methods do I need, all from the standpoint of the controller. What events does the controller need to hear about? What properties does the controller need to be able to set? What methods does the controller need to be able to call? Declare those all in the interface, and then you implement the view. You just come here, you say I'm an iAnalysis view, and you use the refactoring tool to actually insert all the declarations that you need into this class here, which I have done. So let's see how it works. Right? That's just code generated for you by the building tool. Here are the events. So I have the comments here. I'd rather they be in the interface, but anyway, I'm just there's not much to implementing an event. You basically just repeat it here. So those are those events from the interface. There's the line count, and you'll notice what I did was I added a custom set. So that when the controller sets line count, I just don't save it in a variable somewhere. What am I doing? What's actually happening when the property is set?
You're storing it in the view's text files.
Right. Line count is actually, if I hover the mouse, it is a text box. It's a widget in the window, and it has a property text, which is what's displayed by that box. So I just take what the line count's being set to, convert it to a string, and store it in that property, which causes it to be displayed. So this is where things get tied back to what the user sees. Word count works the same way. Someone sets this property, boom, we go and change something in the GUI. Same thing with char count. Now, maybe something needs to be displayed multiple places. So one property being set, you could have code to change several things in the display. So these are all the properties that we provide in the interface that is what the controller uses to manipulate things. And, okay, now we have message. Oh, that's another property. Now we have these two methods, do close and open new, which didn't work as properties. Those are methods that the controller calls. So to do close, we call our private close method. For open new, we call file analysis application context, which is some code I gave you that you should adapt. Get the context and call run new on it. Now, let's go, what do you suppose that code looks like for run U? Let's go look. See, anytime a new window needs to be created, we are creating a form right here. We're creating a controller by passing the form to it. And then this is just the code you'll need to use to keep track how many windows are open. Okay. What else is in this file now? This analysis view window. That's everything from the interface, right? The events, the properties, the methods. So let's see what's left. Private methods. Where did these come from? Close item click, open item click, new item click, count button click. What's going on there? So those are sort of the low-level event handlers that handle events that happen on the GUI. And it's the job of the view to look at them and do the right thing. For example, suppose that someone clicks the close button in the GUI. What do? Fire the close event. Someone clicks the open menu item in the GUI. What are we doing when that happens? Right, we're bringing up a file dialog, and then if they don't cancel out of it, we're firing a file chosen event that has the file name chosen in the file dialog. So typically, you'll have these handlers are created for you when you double click on things as you're building your GUI. So you'll need those handlers to fire the high level events the controller cares about. And some of them will be very straightforward. Some of them will be a little more involved. Like this one here is very straightforward. There's a one-to-one mapping from this event, this low-level event, to this high-level event. Same thing with new item. Count button click. Yeah, someone clicks the count button, we fire the count event, but we pass along the text that's in the box. That's basically a parameter down to along with this event, so the right thing gets counted. So that's what your control will look like. You'll have these private event handlers. And you'll have, other than that, you'll just have the implementations of the things from the interface. Will you have any instance variables declared in this class? Not here, not in this partial class. There's the other part of the partial class that you really don't need to look at, where the low-level positioning and colors sets and all the colors and the fonts are set. That has instance variables, such as that's where the instance variables like word count and char count are declared. But you don't need any. This is the file that you're editing. You don't need any instance variables here. If you feel tempted to put in instance variables, you're asking too much of your GUI. Okay. Okay, so we've seen you know about the model, been dealing with it for 2 months. You know about this is the view. We looked at the controller. There's an interface that's in between the controller and the view. What's left to understand this strategy that I have in mind? Does this tell you, does this give you what you need to know to do the assignment? Get 100? Yeah, the testing. Right. I've had a lot of questions about that. So the testing stub implements the same interface as the view. So let's look at the testing stub. So over here I have it called something. Oh, up here. I have file analysis for tester. So I have, so you'll notice that what this contains is an analysis view stub and the unit test. So we'll look at the analysis view stubs. analysis view stub. So right off the bat, well, I don't like the way I put these first. We'll skip over these two and come back to them. And we're going to skip over those and come back to them. All right. These are the 6 properties from the interface. And I've declared them with setters and getters because the unit tester needs to look at the values of these properties. So we have, we declare char count, line count, search string, substring count, word count, title, message. Okay? We have to declare the 4 events that are in the interface. That's easy. And we have to implement the methods from the interface. And that's how we implement. Now let's look at what I've added in addition to the things in the interface. What's the purpose of this property right here? You can read the comment, but why is it there? Why do we need a called do close method in this stub? Yeah?
So we can test if when that gets called, we know if it actually works or not.
Okay, so let's say we want to write a unit test to make sure that the close button works properly. So what we'll do is, when we're using the stub, is there's no window to close. We just, when the controller gets around, as it should, to calling the do close method, we don't close a window. We set this property to true. So this property gets set to true, and then the unit test can assert that call do close is true. That just means that the controller properly called the close method. And same thing down here. This is used so that the unit test can tell that the method that opens a new window was called as it's supposed to be called. Now, what are these 4 methods for? Fire close event, fire count event, fire file chosen event, and the other one. What are they in there for? Yeah.
Just used to set off the event.
Okay, the unit tests need to be able to cause the events to be fired. Normally those events are fired because someone's clicking on the GUI. Unit test doesn't have a GUI to click on. The unit test is just going to call the fire close event method, and that will just fire the close event. And then it will see if the right method call comes back from the controller. So this is how you set off the unit test, is you fire events and see how the controller reacts to it. So these aren't in the interface. These are in the analysis view stub itself. They're not named in the interface. Those are the properties, and we saw everything else. So what we had to add were these methods that let us know that methods have been called, and then these fire events that allow us to fire events. So you'll have to do the same sort of thing. You'll have to devise a way of using properties and methods and events to implement the interface and to give enough functionality to the unit test so that it can simulate the behavior of the GUI. So let's go back to let's actually look what a unit test looks like. Okay, so what's happening, look at this test, this code right there. What is that unit test doing? Okay, what's it doing?
It creates the new stub.
Okay.
Controller to that stub.
Okay, so what he said was it's creating a stub and passing it to controller, creating a controller to control the stub.
And it's calling the close event on the stub.
Okay, so then it's asking the stub to pretend that the close button has just been clicked by firing the close event.
And then checking if that
And then we're making sure that the controller, initially called do close is false, so we're just making sure that it got turned to true, presumably because the controller called the close method. So that's just a simple test, not much to it. Okay, what's going on here? Okay, as before, we're creating a stub and we're creating a controller to control it. Okay? That's telling the stub to fire an event, fire the file chosen event. So it's simulating that the user has just picked a file from from a dialog. Now, what is the controller going to do when that fire chosen event gets fired? Okay. So what happens in my little GUI when someone picks a new file? What changes about the display? You can pretty much see what it does if you look at these assertions here.
The counts fill out.
Yeah. So first thing it does is it changes the title to testfile1.txt. It changes the title to the name, the title of the window to the name of the file. It updates the line count, the word count, and the character count. So the way these unit tests work is you just fire an event and then assert that the right stuff happened to the stub. The controller did the right things to the stub. You fire another event. We say how many is's are there in testfile1.txt. You make sure that the controller tells you there are 2. That's what the unit tests look like. So what would a unit test for you? Suppose you want to test, you make sure that when, maybe you've got a formula that depends on another cell, 2 other cells, and you want to check to make sure that when you change the value of one of those cells, that the value of the formula is updated too. So you change the contents. You got one cell contains equals A1 plus A2, and you want to simulate what happens when you change the contents of A1 to some new number. So what would a unit test look like for that in your unit test you'll be writing? How would they be the same or different from here? Would you have to do anything like this? Yeah. You'll create a spreadsheet GUI stub and pass it to the controller. So now you have a controller object that's controlling the stub. All right? Now, what event would the test method have to fire now? We want to simulate what happens when cell A1 is changed to a new number. What do you think? What event are we going to have to fire on the stub? Yeah.
We'll have to fire the set cell contents.
Okay, so presumably you have a event called cell contents changed event or something. So you'll fire that event and you'll pass along as parameters the cell name that changed and what it changed to. And the model will do whatever it's supposed to do when the contents of a cell changes. Then, what kind of assertions would you make to make sure that the controller did the right thing? What needs to be changed in the view when the contents of cell A1 change? Yeah?
The text editor box.
Okay, so the text editor box ought to end up containing the new contents. Okay? So presumably you have a property corresponding to, the stub contains a property corresponding to the contents of the contents editor box. So you check, there'd be an assertion that it contained the right thing. What else needs to change? Yeah?
The value of the cell.
Okay, you need to make sure that the value of that A1 changed to whatever it's supposed to change to. Let's say it's changed to 2. Also, that formula, let's say the formula is stored in cell C1. Since it depended on A1, we would expect C1's value to change as well. So we need to make an assertion about A1's new value and about C1's new value. And if you're really a purist about it, you really ought to assert that nothing else changed. It just depends on how paranoid you want to be, how thorough you want your test to be. But really, you ought to test that nothing else has changed. But I doubt many people will do that. How will we assert that the value of A1 has been changed to 3 and the value of C1 got changed to 7? What do you have to have? Yeah.
We'd have to have a method in the stub or in the view. We'd have to interact with that method to actually get the value
Okay, so the stub would have to have a little bit of state then. So in addition to properties, the stub is going to have like say a hash map, a dictionary that maps from cells to their values. And so you'd make assertions. To make an assertion about A1, you'd have to look into that dictionary. So that means that the method in the stub that is called by the controller to change the value of the cell would actually, instead of actually changing the value of the cell somewhere, it would store it in a hash map, so that it could be looked up and asserted about by the unit tests. So you have to write be a little more complicated than this, because you have to have a little bit of state there in the stub to keep track of mappings from cells to values, but not too bad. And then the goal is to make the view as simple as possible, so that, because we're not testing the view. The only way you're testing the view is by using the program, and that's not a great way to test. But make it as simple as possible, put the complexity in the controller, because that can be tested. All right, so that's a very detailed tour of the way I want things structured. Hopefully it wasn't too early this time, because I'll find out in a few days if it was. All right, any last questions about this before I look at something different? Yeah.
This code is available on your repository, right? Or
The starting point?
yeah. Or
Yeah.
the file analyzer.
Oh yeah, file analyzer is in my examples
Okay.
repository, which you have. Yeah.
In the UML diagram, is the form object the only thing that we're not writing ourselves? Like everything else is written by us?
Well, let's go to the UML diagram. Okay, so here's the UML diagram. Yeah, form is a built-in class in .NET, so you're not writing the form class. Analysis window, I mean, Visual Studio is writing a lot of that for you. You do it interactively via that interface. And everything else is stuff that you're writing. Although launch and file analysis application, you can basically copy from me and change the name, and so that's not a big deal. So most of your effort is going to be on the controller and the analysis window. Okay. Well, there's one thing that just occurred to me that I want to mention, because I get lots of questions about this. So this is my spreadsheet repository, and I want to go to the PS6 branch, because I guess PS7 will work. I'm not sure. Okay, so there's spreadsheet. Here's that file, spreadsheet.xsd. And the thing about spreadsheet.xsd is it has to be read by the executable. And so the question always comes up, how does the executable, how does the code, the spreadsheet code, find that file? And the answer is, don't put any path name on it. When you open it, you just say open, and in quotes, spreadsheet.xsd, just the name of the file. And by default, where it'll start looking for it is in the same folder that the exe file is. Okay? Now that seems to be a problem, because if we look, I'm going to switch to a view where we can see the actual file organization. Here's the spreadsheet class here, and it contains spreadsheet.xsd. But where does spreadsheet.xsd need to be? The executable file that we're going to build from this is not there right now. Where is build all?
you right click the spreadsheet, did you usually do that, or the solution on top?
Oh, I know. I have to switch back out of this mode. Let me build the solution here. That's got, oh, okay. That's not going to work. Okay, here's the bottom line. The spreadsheet XSD has a property. So if you open the properties,
It's below.
there's this property called copy to output directory, which you need to have set to copy if newer, or to copy always, but you don't want to have it set to do not copy. So what that means is when you build your solution, your projects are compiled and there's an assembly is created for each project. So in the case of spreadsheet, it's a DLL. The DLL file is stored down in a bin/debug folder. If you have copy if newer or copy always on this spreadsheet XSD file, it is also copied to that bin/debug folder along with the executable that was built. And so it's there where the executable expects to find it. If this property gets unset, then suddenly you get an error that it can't read the file. So that's what goes there. Okay, let me tell you where we're headed. So you've got this assignment, and you're going to finish it, and then it's going to be spring break, which is just fine with me and with you. Okay. There will be an assignment. So there are going to be two assignments. The next two assignments. So PSA, I told you last time, is going to be a group assignment. I'm going to try to make it fairly simple. It's going to be just an assignment about parallel programming, about multitasking. So it'll be some experiments you'll do with multitasking that don't have anything to do with any bigger project. And that assignment will be due the Thursday after spring break. So I want to design it so you don't have to worry about it over spring break. You can just come back and do it that week. The next assignment, PS9, will be a lot more substantial. And in it, what you're going to be doing is building a client, basically another GUI, that plays the game of Boggle using a remote server. So we'll be using the REST stuff that we talked about. So you'll be making REST calls against the server. So I've written the server, so I'll have that server running, and your client will need to connect to the server, and the server will take care of pairing up other clients to play games. The server serves as the referee. So you're basically writing a GUI that communicates with a remote model, in a sense. That's my server. So that's PS9. And then the remaining assignments, you'll be building a server. So you'll be building a Boggle server to replace the one I'm going to give you at the beginning. And we'll build it in stages. First we'll build a simple one that doesn't make use of a database. Then we'll add a database back into it. So, anyway, that's where we're headed. There's only 10 minutes left, so I'm not going to try to start a new topic. So let's just end here, and I'll see you on Thursday.
I have a question.